Hi, I'm Sean Glaze, author of Staying Coachable. And the best advice I ever got was to surround yourself with great people and make sure you listen a whole lot.
Ooh, surround yourself with great people and listen a whole lot. Who gave you that advice, Sean? How old were you?
I was probably, oh goodness, this was the very first year that I started coaching, Phil. And I got into basketball having never played basketball. But the coach that I ended up coaching with had known me in high school. I'd gone to school and probably didn't do what I should have the first year, so my GPA wasn't where it was supposed to be. And the guy that was going to be an attorney ended up falling into an English coach or English teaching position. And during pre-planning, the guy that was head coach, I was actually at the school I graduated from. The guy was head coach when I was a student, hunted me down a couple of days into pre-planning. Hey, Sean, would you be willing to coach basketball? Man, Coach Morgan, I know nothing about basketball. He's like, that's all right. I can teach you the X's and O's. I know who you are, know what type of job you'll do. Would you be interested? Well, at that point, my soon-to-be fiance and later wife was still in nursing school at Georgia Southern. So I didn't have anything else to do. Sure, I'll fill my winter evenings and afternoons and weekends with coaching basketball, and I'll learn along the way. And that started what was over 2 decades of just loving locker rooms and competition and camaraderie, and obviously connection and the leadership stuff that I came to pick up, having been a varsity basketball coach and starting out as a 9th grade guy who didn't know much of anything. And Coach John Morgan, who has since passed, was a fantastic mentor who really did a great job of leading a program and really building, wasn't very strong with the X's and O's, which is what I've convinced myself early on was so darn important. But he was great with people, and he was great with organizing and all that it took to kind of put together what is a basketball program. And he was one that, again, if you put good people around you and you're willing to listen, you're going to have some success. And that's something I never forgot.
That's so interesting. You don't have to know the X's and O's in order to be a great coach, in order to put together a great program. That's so interesting, right? And by maybe not know, but yeah, I mean, of course, you got to understand the basics of it. But I mean, you don't have to be an expert. So, Sean, that is very contrary, though, to what so many say. They say, you know what? If you're not an expert at what you do, right? So those who can do, those who can't teach. And I know, like you do, that is BS. So talk to me about how you overcame that, man, because that is that.
Well, that really that started my journey, and I sought. Once I decided I was going to do something, you want to be really good at what you're going to do. And again, you got to be willing to be bad long enough to get better. But along the way, think about your first clients. I think about my first classes and my first teams and how bad I was as a teacher and as a coach and what you have to learn along the way. But I convinced myself, because I didn't have the X's and O's knowledge, because I wasn't familiar with the technical side of the game. That's where I poured all of my energy and all of my effort. And I think that that's a lot of times what leaders do is they focus so much on strategy, on tactics, they end up missing the cultural side and the connection side that allows that strategy to succeed. And that obviously is what eventually I came around to, because I face planted for a few years as a coach, because I was so intent on building that backlog of knowledge and doing the research and going to the clinics and spending time putting together the technical side that I had obviously come in completely ignorant of. But that was really to the neglect of stuff that later in my career and now with different teams and organizations I really focus on, which is what is the culture allowing your strategy to do?
Wow, that's fun, man. So I remember my freshman basketball coach. In fact, I lived in his house in Florida here, funny enough. So I totally, Gary's now one of my dearest friends in my life, right? Gary Wandrish, one of my early coaches that had a huge impact on me. So, Sean, this book, though, Staying Coachable, has some fictitious players in it,
right,
and a fictitious parent. Or is that you and your son? I mean, tell me about this.
Well, the book, and I'm very excited. The book is coming out October 28th. Just got
You
the very
got it!
first proofs in, so really excited to be able to
Woo!
hear that very, very soon with audiences and those that have been inquiring. Have the pre-sale going on now leading up to the 28th. But the book itself is one that, as you might imagine, Phil, having been a coach, having been a parent, having been a leader in whatever industry, one of the most challenging and frustrating things as a leader, as a parent, as a coach, is to have somebody that you see potential inside of, that you know could be if only. And sometimes you talk to players about, man, if you just had a consistent motor, man, if you just played hard, and if you just, whatever that if you just is, and they didn't always appreciate and apply that advice or that encouragement or that technical coaching because they'd already convinced themselves they were good enough, or maybe it was uncomfortable to do something different. And what I noticed is going from coaching, which obviously is where you see it early on, is in athletics, but going from coaching to then working with organizations and companies and teams and leaders, you realize how consistently that ends up translating into the workforce. And people as employees and coworkers who aren't as coachable and end up basically sabotaging their success and limiting themselves by building a ceiling of sorts because they weren't willing to admit that need and to appreciate those that were able to pour into them, if only they hadn't already been too full of whatever ego or assumptions that they kind of brought to the table. And hopefully this is something that, you mentioned the characters. Obviously, it's a fictional work. It is a leadership parable. Huge fan. I know you're very familiar with Bob Berg, and The Go-Giver is fantastic. And obviously, John Gordon with some of he's done a tremendous job. So in that same vein, it is a story that carries within it, hopefully, 4 really powerful nuggets of a process to, obviously, individually, we all need to be coachable and to stay coachable. But then maybe some things that we can share with those on our team that will make them a little bit more apt to accept some of the coaching that we're wanting to provide.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the fact that it's a parable. Again, your parables are fantastic, Sean. I really enjoy them. I would put them up there with Bob and Pat Lencioni and Farber's books. I mean, they're really, really strong, man. I really enjoy them. And this is no different. It's super easy to read, which I really love. I mean, I sat down, I read about 8 pages, and then the kids distracted me, and then I read the rest. I read the rest.
Well, again, you had not just parenting, but you had the homeschool stuff going on for a few days. So I know you've had an unbelievable full plate. So to be able to tackle what you do in addition to being able to get through the book. And I really appreciate you saying that. It is, again, hopefully an engaging story. And my wife likes this one better than the others. I think it has a little bit more of an emotional edge to it as you get kind of towards the end. But I think this one that I'm very much proud of and can't wait to be able to get it in the hands of people that I know will benefit from the story and the takeaways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So 4 big lessons here. Let's talk a little bit about them because I think they're both simple and hard, right? I love that. I mean, that's, and the way that you set up each one of them with a visual metaphor. I mean, I could just see you on stage with the audience walking through each of them really, really well. So let's talk first about one that most say they have, right? That motor, if you will, that hunger to get better, that hunger to be coachable. Talk to me about that one, Sean, because I might argue that's the one that if you don't have that, you got nothing. So talk to me about hunger.
Oh man, well, I just got through not long before I had finished writing this and going into all the production and publication process. I just gotten through reading James Clear's Atomic Habits. And
there we go.
Fantastic book, obviously, bestseller, and he does a tremendous job and love his writing insight. But one of the things that I was thinking to myself as I was reading through, and he does a tremendous job of giving, again, talking about the triggers and what leads to reestablishing some habits. And one of the things I was thinking, though, is you only get to changing habits if there's been something as a catalyst before that leads to the desire and the need and the commitment to then make those habits stick, and to because we all have habits that we know may be bad for us that we don't always change because there's not that specific desire, there's not that specific hunger or that clarity about what is the why and what is that reason, what is it I specifically want to accomplish. And so the story is about climbing, and I know that you're familiar with it as those that may be eventual readers. It uses the metaphor of climbing and mountain climbing, obviously, in terms of what are those challenges, because we're all presented with mountains, and that first mountain is one that if we surmount it, it's only an invitation to the next mountain. But in order to climb it, you have to choose what is that summit that I want to seek and what is the specific one I want to climb. And I think oftentimes the reason people don't succeed in whatever area is they're not specific enough about the mountain that they want to identify, that they're going to be passionate about focusing on with some type of commitment. And that's something I think, even going back to my teaching, Phil, one of the things you notice, not just with coaching and not just with leadership and business, but even in the classroom, I think one of the most important conversations I had with students that now I encourage leaders to have in one-on-one conversations with their people in terms of building culture is, what is your why? What is that reason that you want to come in and be considered? How can I help you do it? What is that thing that you see yourself letting this accomplish to you eventually becoming, or what is that 5 or 10 year goal that you might have for yourself? Where do you see it? How can I help you to get there? And a lot of times students would come in, whether it's as freshmen or as juniors or seniors in the high school classroom, and they would show up because it was routine and they would kind of go through the motions, but they didn't really have an idea of why they were there and what that diploma would be a ticket to 5 or 10 years down the line. And so I think sometimes having that specific idea of what is it that you want and what is it that you're wanting to really chase. Again, vague desire inspires vague efforts. And so the more specific you can be, I think the more likely you are to accomplish whatever it is you set out for.
So that's interesting. The what and the why being very specific, especially as we're, maybe it's the first time that we're doing something, or maybe we don't ever see any representation of someone who's done more than we had. Like my little town, Sean, I'll tell you, there was never, not that I was ever going to make it in the NBA. I'm short and very slow, like a snail. But I wanted, I want to play pro baseball, and I was pretty good, but I never saw anybody that made it to the big leagues.
Mm-hmm.
And so my why was smaller. It was, to make the all-star team, and I did. That was the whole what and the why, right? To, so that I could, be seen as a star and be, that was my hunger there. But how do we help inspire kids or even adults that are like, wow, hey man, that's great that Sean and Phil want to be CEO. They have seen people that are CEOs. So how do we help them see what's possible when maybe they haven't seen what's possible?
I think that is such an important question, because no matter where we're at, there's always a next. And I think that, I may not see mountains that other people are already in the midst of climbing, because that's not where I'm at on my journey. But I've got this mountain in front of me that I've chosen that can be my next. And that gives me a chance to see the next one that I might want to try and ascend. And I think that sometimes, as you said, the difficult thing in youth is sometimes you don't have those examples of success that give you the idea that something might be possible beyond what might be in your circle of influence or your surrounding or that family atmosphere that you've grown up with. But as we get a little bit older and as we're exposed to a little bit more in terms of opportunities and possibilities, certainly that idea of what's next for me, and regardless of industry, where your people are when you're having those one-on-one conversations, I think that establishing that hunger, hopefully they're bought into and they're engaged because they understand what they're doing is contributing to something that is going to affect somebody down the line. But specifically for them, what is it that they're hungry for? What is it that they desire? What is that next thing for them where I can help them to show up excited that next day, so that it's not just them contributing to something, but us hopefully helping them to grow so that they see what's available for their next. What is that mountain that they're wanting to climb? And we all, again, in the midst of our jobs, it might be, as you see in the story, it might be that challenge of, learning a new, online platform.
CRM system, yeah. Which was like, hey, I'm doing that right now, man. Right on.
Certainly not alone. But I do. I think that that's a huge part is recognizing that no matter who or where we are, we've all got a next. We've all got something that might be a challenge. And we all sometimes need that encouragement to imagine it's available to us if we'll just commit to that climb, that there's always going to be resources and support available.
Yeah. So what if there's not, though, Sean? What if there's not anybody inside an organization that can help coach us? How do we stay coachable when the coaches absent or there isn't one available.
Oh, and I think that's a really easy, and I don't want to use the excuse word because I don't want people to get turned off from, oh, well, Sean doesn't understand my circumstances. But I also passionately believe, Phil, that if you decide that something is important and that's going to be the thing that I chase, we're going to eventually, if we start moving in that direction, we're going to bump into people and eventually see further down that path people that can become mentors if we make those connections. And whether it was going from a basketball coach to become an author and a speaker and making some of those connections and meeting people like yourself who have been a little bit further, a little bit faster, and made a few more connections and had a little bit more impact that you want to have the opportunity to share. I think that you can always find, especially today with all the digital opportunities to connect with, you can reach out and make those connections and make those introductions and find so much information. And I think I'll make the point later in the story, that it's not when the student is ready that the teacher will appear. I think oftentimes when the student is ready, they just realize the teacher has been there. They just hadn't noticed it.
Yeah, I agree. I think what you said there is super important, right? Start moving in the direction you seek. If you think that nobody's next to you, right, then get moving. And that gets back to your first point, right? Surround yourself with the right people. I would say, even if you don't know why you need them around you, because people know, man, now in today's world, we're 1.8 people away from anybody we wanted to meet. Anybody
it's no longer the 6
meet.
degrees of Kevin
No,
Bacon,
sir.
right?
No. It's the 1.8 degrees of any president now because of social media's slimness down, right? So if you think about it, right? So regardless of how you vote, the last two presidents couldn't be more opposite politically.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I am not first degree connected to either one of them, but I know people that have met Trump and have met Biden. Well, that's one person from the president of the United States. Here in the United States, it's so interesting, right? That starting moving is so important, right? My friend Raj Sethi says, it's the law of action, bud. Move forward imperfectly so that you bump into the right people. And you say that in your book so well and show us that so well, because who knew some little old lady was going to be the Yoda that we needed, right? The Sherpa that we needed.
And you mentioned that, and I think that even as the story begins, I think that's maybe an unconscious part of, when the dad takes his son on a trip to maybe have some difficult, inspiring conversations that might be a catalyst to the son beginning to open his eyes and become more coachable. It wasn't the father, but just the action and the commitment to begin to take some type of action and make some type of movement opens the door for other things that you don't suspect might happen to come into play. And
absolutely.
Yeah, so that's something that I think that we all are in control of, making that commitment to action. And again, you can't steer a parked car, right? You can always make adjustments, but until you start moving, you can't necessarily begin to steer and change and adjust momentum that action prefers to provide.
Yeah, make that commitment to action because you can't steer a parked car. It's so good, man. So good. So let's go deeper on the other ones. We're not going to hit all four today, Sean, but I think one that gets overlooked a lot of times is one that I'm working on myself, and that's humility. A lot of times we're not as humble as we maybe need to be in order to do things. So talk to me about humility, Sean.
Well, I'm the most humble person I know, Phil.
Oh, that's right. Yes, you are. Good point. Yeah, I missed that. I read that in the book, actually.
My wife would tell you that I've never had a problem with humility. And then she would wink, and then she would gag, and then she would tell you what a complete idiot I was for way too many years in way too many areas of my life, because I was probably one of the most ridiculously ignorant, arrogant people sometimes in terms of the assumptions that I would make. And I think that that's something that we all work on. Even those of us who truly are humble, I think sometimes recognize that it is a continual struggle. It's something that will always be challenged by. And that said, I think it's a huge part of being willing to accept coaching and to appreciate. And there's part in the book where you go from the need for hunger and the questions that lead to identifying what is that thing that we want to be the catalyst that inspires us to begin to take action, and then to be honest about where we are and what are those numbers that we need to pay attention to, and to be clear and not let kind of the positive filters or neglect of reality to keep us from acknowledging where we're at and the gap between where we are and where we need to be. But once you realize there's that gap, it's sometimes even still difficult to acknowledge because of that lack of humility. And you mentioned the specific things that are part of the story that are the physical reminders of each part of that kind of 4-step process. And for humility, it's the full cup. And again, it's certainly not original, but the idea of you can't pour into a full cup. And if your cup's full of ego and assumptions, then no coach is going to be able to make you better if your cup's already full of stuff that isn't going to be nearly as valuable as what somebody else might be able to offer. And I think that, looking back, I think we're all, if we're honest with ourselves, when you look back over some of the decisions and some of the interactions that you've had, it makes you cringe a little bit to think about the fact that, man, my cup was way too full of ego and assumptions, and I should have been so much more humble and so much more willing to listen and so much more sincerely curious and so much more appreciative of what people were willing to share, instead of thinking, no, I got this, I'm good enough. And I think that's something that hopefully resonates with readers and with leaders and with athletes and with workers, regardless of industry, because certainly it affects team performance and connections and relationships, and ultimately, the results that they're going to enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely, man. The fact that it's a continuous struggle is a wonderful and worrisome thing, right? It's wonderful because I can always get better. The worrisome thing is, man, it's never done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, humility is an ongoing process of humbling ourselves. And I think that diner mug is such a strong representation. In fact, I would challenge you to think about putting your book cover on a mug and including that as part of what you send out, because that is the one we all struggle with. At least it's the one I struggle with. Maybe not you, man, but I struggle with that the most because I think my cup is full of good stuff and it's really filled with bacon grease. All the stuff that was good before it hardened and crystallized and changed my heart.
Look at you with the powerful metaphor.
So, well, hey, I read your book, man. What can I say, right? I'm just trying to show off here. I got one metaphor in me for those listening, right? You all know, yeah. But no, in all honesty, though, I really think that is the strongest and the biggest reminder for all of us is that we need to stay, we need to stay coachable, not just because it's the part of your book, but humbly stay coachable, humbly accept that even yesterday's coach still has something to teach us tomorrow.
And I really appreciate you sharing that. And I'm already beginning to think about possibilities to kind of use maybe the mug even more in terms of helping to demonstrate what is, I think, one of the more powerful parts of that process. And one of the things I think that humility allows us to do, and hopefully me to do more consistently, is to appreciate instead of being annoyed by. And I think that sometimes we catch ourselves being annoyed by instead of appreciative of. And whether that is in a conversation where somebody is maybe even willing and intentionally trying to share, oh, I don't need to hear. But sometimes you'll miss that one little nugget that completely changes the trajectory of what you might have thought. And so, that idea of being appreciative. And I think one of the questions there is, if everything you had taken for granted was taken away, what would you be left with, whether it's relationship or in terms of, those physical things, but the idea of being grateful and greedy for those conversations makes such a huge difference, and not just deepening conversations, but giving you so much more of a full cup of that good stuff that maybe hadn't crystallized from age.
Yeah, well, and that gets back to your hunger point, right? If we're hungry to learn more, if we're hungry to be more appreciative, hungry for more progress, we're going to have a lot better shot here at being successful. So as we do that, we could step through all the points, Sean, but your last point is probably the one that I think many can benefit from the most, and that's these daily habits, the daily coachable habits. So talk to us about some of the habits we need if we want to get started staying coachable. How do we do that? Give us just a couple of those, man, that we can do today.
Well, I think one of the habits, and I've just finished putting together what will be the application guide for the book to help people not just to have read it, but how can we apply it and really make it meaningful and relevant so I do make changes and I do maintain a little bit of mindfulness as we move forward. So it's not just I finished the book, but I've benefited from the book and the story and the takeaways. And specifically, I think that the first habit is just being intentional about staying aware and keeping those 4 parts of, what is that hunger and what is that specific thing that I'm actually waking up excited for, and what is my honest numbers in my current situation, and where is that gap? And then obviously the third, being humble and continuing to seek out and build deeper relationships with those people as mentors that can help us to be better and to appreciate that advice and to be grateful for that gift of feedback instead of being annoyed by the feedback that sometimes we're not as willing to accept, but would have given us the opportunity to grow. But the idea of habits is once you get to that 4th part of the process, I think you have more of a clear idea of where you need to focus and what I do need to do a little bit differently, and what are some of the things that have been distractions that I need to be intentional about replacing that with something that's going to be a little bit more beneficial to get to the top of this particular mountain that I've chosen. And I think that one of the most powerful parts of maintaining habits is that last part of the story, and how am I going to continue to make sure that I show progress and that I acknowledge progress. And you see this not just in individual circumstances and impact, but in the great resignation that we have with COVID. I think so much of that is because people maybe haven't felt as appreciated for their efforts. And what am I doing to acknowledge for myself that I'm making progress? Because once you identify a purpose, identifying progress is the most motivating thing I think that you can do. And if you can have some sense of progress, whether it's checking something off of a calendar or maintaining numbers and making sure that you keep up with that measurement that's going to be relevant to what you're wanting to accomplish, I think that identifying what are those distractors and what are those things that I really need to do differently, and then adding consistently are the things that really make a difference. It's the action that obviously ultimately makes a difference in the results we get.
Love that, Sean. Being intentional and specific about your hunger, being honest about where you are right now, and then seeking out those people that can help us and appreciating their gifts of feedback and the gift of progress is so valuable, Sean. That's great stuff, man. I love that you also gave us an application guide, that you're going to do more stuff like that. Absolutely. I mean, you've got so much here that can help us. And I know you've got so much even more. So folks, if you're listening to this, if you're watching this and you're like, oh my gosh, I gotta copy this book. The book is Staying Coachable. This is Sean Glaze, Glaze. If you want to get to know more about Sean, go to greatresultsteambuilding.net. Check out his book, get a copy, learn the 4 pieces of staying coachable, and you will see your success soar. Sean, as always, man, you made me smarter, you made me better, and I appreciate you so much, man. Thanks for helping me stay coachable, brother.
Absolutely thrilled to be on. Thank you so much for having me, Phil. Really hopeful I was helpful for your audience. If ever I can be of any service to them, leading teams or working on improving, making a little bit more positive or powerful team cultures, know that I would be thrilled to offer whatever resources that I can. And again, Great Results Team Building, you can actually sign in for the toolbox, and there's all kinds of stuff available for leaders to use. But very much appreciate the opportunity to share Staying Coachable. I'm really excited about the impact it's going to have.
Yeah, I am too, Sean. I so appreciate your time. Folks, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Now go out and stay coachable. Have a great day.